curriculum should be empowering for teachers, and it should be a guideline to make sure that all of our students get the same quality education, but it shouldn't be dictated and it shouldn't be boring. And curriculum should be ever changing. Our students change every day. We change every day. The way that our students come in and what knowledge they come in with changes on a daily basis. And the scenarios and situations that students come from affect their ability to interact with learning. And so we need to be aware of that. And we need to make sure that our curriculum, unlike our standards, doesn't sit there and stultify and rot for 30 years. We need to be aware of changes.
Welcome to Imagining Possibilities for Music Learning and Teaching. I'm Evan Tobias, Associate Professor of Music Learning and Teaching at Arizona State University, and I'm so happy you're here. This is an invitation to pause and reflect not only on what music education is and how we can do what we do better, but to consider what music learning and teaching could be, to imagine possibilities and move in new ways. Ready to design, update, expand, or transform your music program? Let's imagine possibilities. Hey music educators, this is the launch of Imagining Possibilities for Music Learning and Teaching. And with this being episode number 1, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context in terms of what you'll be hearing over these next couple of episodes, and then we'll launch right into the conversation. If you've ever encountered research in music education, it's often in the form of presentations at conferences or articles in peer-reviewed journals. And unfortunately, a lot of times those articles are locked away behind paywalls, where if you don't have access to some kind of library where you can get those articles, you don't have access to that research. And this is an unfortunate thing in the field that a lot of us who do research and who engage with research are often frustrated about. Now, there are definitely journals in music education that are either open access or just don't lock their articles behind paywalls, and I've included some of those on my website. But, for a long time, the field has talked about how do we make music education research more accessible and more available to music teachers, and part of this podcast is to do that. So the first set of episodes you're going to hear in the podcast are interviews from a large-scale research project that I've been working on for the past 2 years. So this study was on music educators' experiences and perspectives on music curriculum and curriculum development. It started off with a very large national survey, and from that, I found people who were interested in speaking with me. And of those folks, some of them provided permission to have their real name shared and provided permission for their interviews to be shared. When the podcast episodes are research interviews, the main role that I'm playing is to learn from and with whoever the person is I'm speaking to, just like you might be learning with us as well. So what that means is that you're not typically going to be hearing me share my perspectives explicitly during the interview. So you're not necessarily going to hear me agreeing or disagreeing. Sometimes you will. I'm a human being. Now, at the end of the interview, in the episode, you will hear me share some takeaways that I think you would find valuable that you could put into practice or think through. But if you're looking for more of my own perspectives, that's what's going to be in the newsletter, and then also in the episodes that are not research interviews. In this episode, I'm talking to Emily Bilodeau. This conversation happened in 2024. It's part of this ongoing research study. She gives us a lot of things to think through in our own practice, in our own planning, in the ways that we might think about curriculum and curriculum development. So stay until the end. I'll share some takeaways and let's get started. So Emily, how do you like to introduce yourself?
To the children or to adults?
to adults.
Usually I go by Emily Bilodeau.
Okay. And then what style, type of teaching, area of teaching do you tend to focus on and share with other folks when you're talking to them about what you do?
I teach elementary music and I teach private wind lessons.
Okay, great. So in a couple of sentences, can you just give a sense of what your program is like and how the curriculum is situated in your program?
Sure. I teach K through 5 students. So for a lot of them, it is the first experience they have with an organized music class. I work in a very diverse community. I work in Randolph, Massachusetts. Our students speak over 44 different languages. We come from a large variety of backgrounds. We have a big immigrant population, and we spend a lot of time developing music literacy and music oral skills from the very beginning. I want students to have those tools so that they can access traditional music programs, but I also want to foster their love of music just in their lives. And so we don't exclusively focus on, this is our written music and this is the only way it's got to be. I try to expand to include everybody's cultures as much as I can.
Thank you so much for that context. So I'm also curious, you mentioned that you're a curriculum nerd. Can you speak a little bit about your own education around curriculum and what's been helpful to you in the past?
So I started when I was an undergrad, which is longer ago than I would care to admit. And at the time, my mother worked at an essential school, and I was really interested in how we would create music that would fit into an essential school. And so I did an independent study on creating curriculum that would mesh with the philosophy of an essential school. And so that was really, I think, where it started. I found myself with my first teaching job in California at a private school. So I had a lot of freedom, and I was pretty much their first music teacher. They were just getting started. And so I was responsible for writing curriculum for general music pre-K through sixth grade, and the chorus and band curriculum as well for the middle school program. I realized how much I enjoyed it. And I've continued that really with every school that I've been at. Several years ago, I was selected to be part of the team that wrote the new Massachusetts Arts Curriculum Frameworks. They hadn't been updated since, the 1990s. I think it was 1994.
Yeah,
they were very old. So I'm really proud of the work that I did with that. I also feel very passionately that diversity and equity and inclusion is a huge part of what we do. So I've worked with the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on that as well. And it's something that I focus on a lot as I continue to work on my own curriculum.
Yeah, that's fabulous. It's so interesting that you mentioned the essential school because it doesn't come up much in music education discourse. Like just the CES is not like even a known kind of entity to a lot of folks. So it's fascinating. Did that have sort of traces beyond that initial undergrad and the family orientation, or is it kind of like a thing that you did and then moved beyond it? Or
so unfortunately, I wasn't able to stay with that. The salary stinks. My own children actually attend a Montessori school.
Okay.
So I've been really interested in a lot of the philosophy from the Montessori classroom and how we approach a very teacher-centered classroom versus a more student-centered classroom. My husband is also a music teacher. He works at the high school level, and both of us have been speaking with the Montessori teachers for several years now and really trying to figure out how we can make a more child-centered and more student-centered classroom and environment for them. So that's been a really interesting and helpful influence that's been a lot of fun to think about.
Have you experienced any professional development that's either positive or not so positive in relationship to curriculum development?
Yes.
Without naming names, yeah, sure.
Yes. I've done some professional development that has been really helpful, where there was a wonderful consultant who came in and I got to work with her again on the standards. And we completely disagreed on almost everything. And it was intellectually a lot of fun and very stimulating. And it made me look differently at the way that I thought about the depth versus the breadth of a curriculum unit.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So a lot of what she said has kind of stuck with me. And while I don't always agree with what she said, it definitely influenced it. I've also been in, a fair number of curriculum workshops that are geared towards non-music teachers that are discouraging.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
I think it has to do probably with the prevalence of pre-written curriculum for math or for ELA, especially in districts where there are more than one elementary school or more than one middle school. And there is understandably a really strong desire to make sure that students are receiving the same quality education from one school to another. But frequently it feels like that translates into, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. Curriculum should not be lesson plans. Lesson plans are separate. Curriculum is a broader umbrella, and it's up to, I feel very strongly, each teacher to decide, how am I going to help my students gain this knowledge? What are we going to do together so that we can work towards them achieving that next step? And when there is a lot of top-down, heavy-handed dictation, it feels as if what ought to be curriculum suddenly becomes open to page 1. Read this paragraph to your students. Now watch everybody's numbers on their page. It's not curriculum anymore. It's lesson planning. And it's frustrating to me that the difference there is not always recognized.
Yeah, I'll probably circle back to this. I'm going to kind of zoom out for a moment and just start off with a very open-ended prompt. So just finish the sentence. Curriculum is...
Fun.
Yes.
Curriculum should be empowering for teachers, and it should be a guideline to make sure that all of our students get the same quality education, but it shouldn't be dictated and it shouldn't be boring, and curriculum should be ever changing.
All right. So yeah, you mentioned in one of your survey responses, you said curriculum is a guide to be used that sets out expected student achievement. So when you use that word guide, and this goes also to your point about what should or should not be dictated, can you give me a sense of, from your perspective, what should be in the guide and what shouldn't be in the guide?
So it is reasonable to say that in a guide, if we're talking about meter, say, students should understand and be able to move, play, sing, write, create within multiple meters. But it shouldn't say on week 6 of second grade lessons, we are addressing 2-4. Students will be writing quarter notes and eighth notes to create their there are so many different ways that we could teach students and have them experience and write and sing and create in multiple meters. And it shouldn't be set out. It should be whatever works best for each teacher and for the students so that they can be met where they are.
So if you experienced a sort of like a curricular, like district-wide scope of sequence that had some of that in that, is it fair to say like there would be like you would want to push back and say, let's make this less specific?
I would say that it should be up to the teachers in the grade to say, I'm thinking about my personal scenario where I'm one of 4 general music teachers at the elementary level. I'm going to pull another example.
Yeah, sure.
Our big piece of repertoire music that our students are listening to this year in second grade is Peter and the Wolf. How are we going to do that? Well, I'm sure not teaching it the same way that my colleagues are teaching it. But at the end, should they all have experienced it? Yes. Should they all be able to identify characters based on instruments? Yes. Should they all be able to discuss what it is that they're hearing that helps contribute to that story? Yes. Are there different ways to teach it? Yes.
And is that where the threshold for you goes from curriculum to lesson plan when it gets at that more specific degree of like, here's how you should teach it?
Yes.
Okay. You also mentioned that curriculum should be ever changing. Can you speak to that a bit?
Our students change every day. We change every day. The way that our students come in and what knowledge they come in with changes on a daily basis. And the scenarios and situations that students come from affect their ability to interact with learning. And so we need to be aware of that. And we need to make sure that our curriculum, unlike our standards, doesn't sit there and stultify and rot for 30 years. We need to be aware of changes. In a different district, in a different time, it would have taken me 5, 6, 7 weeks to get a bunch of kindergarten students at the beginning of the year confidently keeping a steady beat. In the district where I'm in now today with the students that I have, they were doing it on day 1. So it would be silly to keep a curriculum that emphasizes teaching kindergarten students to keep a steady beat. They can already do that. Why shouldn't I be able to alter that curriculum and move forward and do more with that?
Do you have that freedom in your current position to be able to tweak the curriculum?
I do.
And is that done individually or with that group of other folks that you mentioned?
It's done with the group of folks that I mentioned. My department chair also hired me with the expectation and the knowledge that curriculum is something that I've done a lot of work in.
Nice.
And so she does give me probably a little bit more of a lead job with that and a little bit more influence.
Oh, that's great. So you feel empowered by both your colleagues and your administrator. That's wonderful. I wish everyone had that.
So do I.
So one of the things you mentioned is that there's a difference between writing curriculum and selecting material to be used to teach the curriculum. Can you explain that and talk about it a bit?
Sure. So I feel like that, again, goes back to the idea of curriculum versus lesson planning. So if we're talking about harmony this week in 3rd grade, and, we're doing a unit on elements of music, this week we're talking about the idea of harmony. So the way that I chose to do that was to pick a, fun, goofy round for the kids to sing and to pull back a song that we had learned earlier in the year and to add in, a xylophone bass line and to add in boom whacker chords underneath it and then bring in our recorders and we're doing harmony with that. My colleagues are also teaching harmony, but they're not using the same songs. They're not using the same instrument choices. When we pick our repertoire, it is a tool that we use to teach curriculum. So the goal in my lesson today with my 3rd graders, the goal was not, let's learn to sing this song. And this particular song, we were doing One Bottle of Pop. This particular song is not my goal. It's not my curriculum. It's the tool that I use to talk about harmony, which is the curriculum.
There's some discourse out there where people will make the statement, the repertoire is the curriculum. So how would you respond to that?
I think that I've been consulting with some local schools actually at the high school level and helping them with their curriculum. And I think that point becomes especially valid when you're talking about an ensemble.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense to me with our current style of 3 or 4 performances a year. Let's do parades. Let's do special events. Let's do community stuff. Let's do graduation. It doesn't really make sense to think about writing curriculum where maybe at the beginning of the year, we're thinking about intonation. And then with our next unit, we're thinking about balance and blend. And then there's another unit on pitch and rhythm. All of those things go together. So at that point, I think that the repertoire that you choose does become more of an influence on the curriculum. And with the Massachusetts standards, I will say that I think that they addressed that. I was not working with the high school group, so I'm not tooting my own horn here.
Sure. You can toot your own horn, that's cool.
I think that they addressed that really well when they tried to really address the standards towards how are we looking at music from a cultural standpoint? What are our biases and how does that influence what we perform? How do we connect the music that we're performing to the cultural context and historical context that it comes from? And when those are the standards that we're trying to teach, and I mean, I think most reasonable people would agree that those are things that are well worth teaching. When those are the standards that we're trying to teach and bring to our students, it makes more sense to have repertoire become a larger part of the curriculum.
But you're even in that context, you're saying it should be a part of the curriculum rather than the curriculum, right? Like the
Yes.
repertoire as a curriculum.
Yes. I mean, take, for example, a community event, a Memorial Day parade, a Veterans Day ceremony. Maybe we're bringing up some of this very patriotic music, but then we also stop and we take a look at it and we really examine the lyrics. What are we actually saying here? What is the history behind this song? And do we want to reconsider, for example, singing "This Land Is Your Land"? Let's look through all of the lyrics and let's think about where it came from and how is that relevant to us today in our current social context. Do we acknowledge the feelings of Native Americans and say, this is a contentious song? This isn't necessarily historically our land. Do we do it anyway? Do we ignore that entirely? Like, how that's a case in which repertoire really is informing the curriculum, but it still isn't in and of itself the curriculum.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess in a similar vein, I spend a lot of time just paying attention to the conversations going on around curriculum in all the various social media groups and platforms. And there's often this kind of discourse around when someone asks a question, and this is more at the elementary general music level, when someone asks questions about curriculum, the answers that people will typically give are things like, oh, Quaver, game plan, music play online, this particular teachers pay teachers thing. And I'm raising this because again, going back to your point of there's a difference between writing curriculum and selecting material. How would you respond or think about that orientation towards curriculum?
So I think it goes back to the idea of tools again. I love teachers pay teachers. I use it a lot for fun graphics. I use it a lot for subplan activities. I love music play online. I love most of what my students use are their tools and their solfege drills and games. But again, it's not my lesson plan. It's not my objective. We're thinking about form. Music play has a great little form tool where I can easily drag things up. Maybe somebody has done a really thoughtful responding sheet, listening and responding sheet on a piece of music that I happen to be sharing with my students. I think it's a little hard for me to answer how I would maybe respond to it. I am personally very strictly against social media, so I haven't been on it in years. And so I guess I would be interested to hear what the questions are that are being asked, that are being answered with this or that.
Yeah, it's often something like, what's the best curriculum? It's usually like someone's asking about a curriculum. And I find it interesting that people will respond with a product or a tool. It's like, so what you're calling tools, people will discuss those in terms as the curriculum or a curriculum, which I think is interesting. It's a different orientation, right, that people have.
I mean, I think that those can show you a scope and sequence. I think that I think it's a great tool, but there are things that are lacking. There are things that are missing. There are things that, individual students would supplement with. When I taught in a district that had a high percentage of students from India, I wanted to make sure that I was highlighting music from their culture. That's not necessarily there. I teach now in a student or a population where we have a lot of Haitian students and a lot of Vietnamese students. So I don't necessarily use those same songs that I used when I was working with a high population of Indian students. I think it's a great foundation and it's a great thing to pull from. And if you're looking specifically, I need a song that uses La, Sol, and Mi that's in triple meter. Great. Go ahead. It's really easy to search one up and plug it into your lesson plan, but that shouldn't be the whole lesson plan.
Is it fair to say that from your perspective, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I want to make sure I have this right, one should have a curriculum in place before bringing in these various, what you're referring to as tools, the resources?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
And the assembling the tools doesn't create the curriculum.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on a bit. You mentioned fake songs just sing about diversity and equity. Real music lives diversity and equity. So talk about this a little bit and how it relates to curriculum.
Oh man, this is a,
It's a great quote.
a big pet peeve of mine.
Mhm.
So we could sit there and we could sing a song that says, "Oh, we love Senegal, and here are some drums from Senegal." But I mean, forgive my language, that's BS. That's fake music.
Mhm.
It's not real music because it's not actually from that culture. Get out, do the research, find a song that is from that culture, look and learn from musicians that are from that culture. Don't sing a song about how amazing gamelan is. Go actually find a gamelan melody. There are plenty of them out there. Teach that to your students. Have them learn, have them learn about puppetry and make their own puppets in the style of. Don't just sit there and talk about how cute they are. And this is one of the things that really bothers me about pre-made curriculum resources, is that frequently I find songs about how awesome it is to be friends with everybody and to love everybody from every country. Great. Don't say it, live it.
Mm. Right. And I think, I guess it depends on what someone is relying upon in terms of where they're getting their resources that determine in some cases what they feel like meets that threshold of what's acceptable to bring into the classroom. Do you have thoughts about people who, I mean, you already said in your answer, do the work, but for people who either are not quite sure how to do the work, how to approach figuring out what to bring into the classroom when it comes to curriculum and realness in terms of culturally relevant music?
Like I already said, I think a lot of it depends on your student population. And culturally relevant music, can also refer to genres and styles, not just music from another country or music from another time period. So I want to put that out there. And I think we recently had an interesting, very long discussion with a friend of ours about the idea of music and cultural appropriation, which I know it's a big touch point, and I think that it is possibly a reason that people may shy away from using music that isn't, from England, Ireland, and Scotland. I believe that there's a very big and strong difference in the classroom between bringing music in and teaching it to students and helping them use that to see a wider circle of life and to see a larger group of people and to recognize that different isn't bad. But I think that it depends upon acknowledging and recognizing and celebrating where it comes from and when it comes from and who it comes from. Things that I've found really helpful in the past actually are digging around online, and I've found a lot of doctoral theses are where I've found a lot of interesting songs because people have put years of their life and energy and heart and passion into that. And I found some great songs from Brazil in a doctoral thesis. Some of them I still use with my students, and I have students who are from Brazil who recognize them. Hey, my mom is singing that song for me at home. Finding groups in the community whose job is to perpetuate culture from their own histories and their own pasts. There's a wonderful dance group in our area, and right now I'm blanking out on the name, but they came and did a workshop in one of the districts where I recently worked. And one of the songs that they did, I was doing again this year with a second grader who is from Nigeria. Oh, hey, I know this dance. I danced it at home in Nigeria. And the joy that you see on those students' faces when they realize, hey, this is a room that's going to celebrate my music and my culture and my heritage is worth a lot. And yes, it's hard work. And yes, it takes time. And yes, it takes effort. And yes, it takes combing through things. But I think we owe that to our students.
Yeah, I mean, you're raising a lot of great points. I think, there is this sort of continuum along the lines of folks who are not even really thinking about cultural appropriation or just kind of grabbing whatever they find and bring it into the classroom. And then people who are sort of paralyzed because they are so scared of doing it wrong and don't know what to do, and then folks who might make the case that you should not be teaching these musics or cultures unless you have a specific knowledge and experience or are from that like specific culture. How do you navigate all of that, and what suggestions would you give for people sort of doing their due diligence to figure out where they should land?
Do we not teach the blues? Do we not teach rock? Do we not have classes that are based on hip hop? You know, my heritage is German and Canadian and Irish. So does that mean that I can't teach Mozart's music? Does that mean that I can't teach anything to do with Kodai? I think that we get uber sensitive about it sometimes. And I think you're right that it does become paralyzing. We had the incident that I was referring to recently, and I don't want to give anybody away, so I'm going to try and be big, but we had a friend of ours who had a large event, and we were celebrating this friend in a group of community. And I suggested that we use a song that comes from South Africa as a celebration song. And this friend was absolutely paralyzed by fear that because he was not from South Africa, that it would be seen as cultural appropriation. If we refuse to sing or teach or play music unless it's from our own culture, we continue the very problematic practice of ignoring it and othering it and saying, without meaning to, perhaps, that it's not worthy of a place in our classroom.
But it seems like you're also doing that in a thoughtful way, or suggesting that people should do that thoughtfully and with intention. So
yes,
what's the thing that they need to do to include it, but not do it in a problematic way? I mean, I don't need a thesis from you, but like, I guess just if you're talking to colleagues, for folks who haven't really thought all the way through it, when it comes to curriculum, what's the sort of minimum threshold that they need to engage in to sort of do it right?
Don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to tell your students where it comes from. Don't be afraid to address the really scary big issues about where those come from. If you're singing a spiritual, you need to be acknowledging slavery in your classroom. And that's hard. But it is our job as adults to model that behavior for our students. This is a hard topic. Here's the song that comes from this particular culture. People sang this because it gave them hope, because it gave them a belief and a faith in perhaps a better life in the after. People wrote blues songs about horrible life experiences. You know, you're sitting there and giggling because it's about your girlfriend leaving you, but stop for a second. Think about how that feels if somebody that you love leaves. We're singing the national anthem. Students aren't going to know anything at all about what that means unless you tell them the story and take the time to define the words. It's going to have no meaning to them whatsoever. Gave proof through the night that the flag was still there. I mean, it's poetry and it's beautiful and it's lovely. But your third and fourth graders have no idea why that's relevant unless you tell them the story of the Battle of Fort McHenry. And why was the Battle of Fort McHenry so important? That was a pivotal battle. Our students deserve to know the history and the context and the culture behind our music because it makes it a richer experience.
It seems like from what you're saying, sociocultural context plays an important role in your curriculum and with your curriculum development. So can you just speak to that a little bit?
Because context is key. I don't know that I really know how to explain that. It's just such... When you know where music comes from, when you know where art comes from, when you know more or even a little bit, just a first tidbit about the person who wrote it or drew it or built it or imagined it, you learn more about the why. And it makes your life richer and better. And you cannot truly appreciate it without having that information. And I think that perhaps sometimes, and this I think maybe goes into my philosophy of parenting more than anything, sometimes as adults, not sometimes, frequently, we withhold information from children because we think that it is hard or it is difficult or it is complex. Just because children are young doesn't mean that they are dumb, doesn't mean that we should condescend to them, doesn't mean that they are ignorant. If they are ignorant, it's because we are not giving them the information that they need to navigate the world and be a good human. And I feel the same way about music. If we don't give them the context and the information about the people who composed it or played it, or to whom it has been really meaningful, we're hobbling them. Now, obviously, it needs to be done in an age-appropriate manner, but I do think also that, again, as adults and as parents, frequently we underestimate what our children are capable of simply because they are children and they are students. They're still humans. And we need to look at them as fellow humans. And we are teaching them how to be good humans.
Yeah, that's so great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of adultism that goes on in education in general. And to your point, there's probably a lot more we can expect and share with students that gets left behind sometimes. Before zooming in, can you just speak more generally about your perspective on what ought to be the relationship between state music standards and music curricula?
So, state music standards should be the bare minimum. We talked a lot about that when we were writing them. Do we want to set our standards really, really high and where we feel that everybody ought to be so that people will know exactly what is expected? Or should we write our standards so that this is the absolute minimum that every person needs to know when they leave high school to be a well-balanced musician and a well-balanced human? We ended up really kind of erring more towards this is the minimum because we were so afraid that, and this was all pre-pandemic and pre-budget cuts, and it was the old world. We were afraid that if we put in what our dreams would be for every single student and every single standard, that there would be teachers and administration and school boards who would throw up their hands and say, this is impossible. We can't fund this. We can't teach this. We can't have our students in music X number of times a week. We give up. We're not even going to try. So the standards are a minimum. If you can go beyond them, great. Do it. Do more. Give more. Achieve more.
I'm not familiar with the specificity of the Massachusetts standards, and do they use the parallel anchor standards, performance standards type model that the national standards has?
So yes, we tried to keep it that way. The Massachusetts Arts Standards for Music, whatever the strand is, whether it's a general music strand or an ensemble strand or something else, they have 4 main categories, and we did not put connecting in the other ones. We made it its own.
Good for you.
So there is creating, where we've got 3 steps of creating, where we're generating ideas, where we're refining our ideas, and where we're really presenting them. There is performing, and again, there's 3 steps in performing, and there is responding, and then there is connecting. And I will say that I'm a little sad because clearly connecting is very important to me. I'm a little sad that those first 3 all got 3 standards and then connecting only got 2, but I did fight for it to be in there, and I'm glad that other people fought for it as well.
Nice. So I know that both at the national level and then from state to state, there are a lot of different perspectives about how specific or how open-ended the standard should be in relationship to curriculum. So can you just speak to that a bit? I don't, not necessarily like, here's my stance, but just how you think through that degrees of specificity in terms of standards?
I think, again, it goes back to the idea of the standards are a guide of what we want our students to learn, and very specific things within that are a little dicey. The old set of standards in Massachusetts was very specific about saying by kindergarten, students will learn this particular set of rhythms. By fourth grade, students will learn this additional set of rhythms. And then by eighth grade. And there was a lot of discussion about trying to avoid that level of specificity.
Mhm.
So I know that a lot of people that I spoke to also felt at the time that we hobble teachers when we become too specific, and that, yes, we should provide a framework, but that it shouldn't be in the first trimester of fourth grade, we are going to talk about triplet rhythms. And in the second trimester, we are going to address eighth note and 16th combined rhythms. And I guess I'll go back to saying again, I do think that it should be a guide,
Mhm.
that there needs to be a certain amount of accountability, but within that, teachers need freedom.
What would you say to the folks, and because I know that there are folks out there who want the specificity because they want to know what they should be teaching in their programs?
I'd say that they need to advocate to their administration for the time to speak with their colleagues and to really hash it out,
Mhm.
because our colleagues are valuable resources. And if you're not sure, go ask somebody, because either you'll find that they agree with you or that they violently disagree with you, and maybe you can figure out why, and you can come to some kind of compromise as to what ought to be taught specifically and when. And maybe there are things that you didn't consider or that they haven't considered. And if you're really lost, ask them what they would do. It doesn't need to be a disagreement or an argument. I'm asking for your advice. I really don't honestly know when I ought to start teaching 6-8. Please help me figure it out.
When you use the word guide, because you've talked about a curriculum as a guide and you've talked about the standards as a guide, how do those two different guides relate to one another?
So the standards are a guide to the curriculum that you write. Your curriculum needs to cover all of the standards at some point. If you're missing them, then your curriculum is incomplete, and you keep working on it. And you find ways to make sure that your curriculum does address all of the standards, but also that it's addressing the needs of your students.
There's also been, I wouldn't call it pushback, I would say response from, various folks across the field who, when they look, and this is no different than the first set of standards back in 93, 94, where they say, and I think this is often more in ensemble spaces than perhaps elementary general music, but where it's like, well, our program is oriented towards X form of musical engagement, whether that be performing, whether that be responding. Why am I being sort of encouraged or mandated, if it's a state standard, to do all of these different forms of musical engagement when that's not what this class is about? How should people think through that?
They're all connected. How can you perform if you don't know what went into the creation of the music? We look at an etude or we look at a chorale. You need to know what the harmonic underpinnings are. You can't play a chorale without thinking about chord progressions. In my private students, I can't tell you how much time we spend looking at our etudes and looking at our studies and saying, okay, well, what is the chord underlying this set of arpeggios here? And how can I use that to bring out the musicality? It enhances your performance. If you were in the audience, if you were responding, what would you want to hear? How are you going to perform this music in a way that generates the response that you want? How are you going to sing that solo in a way that brings tears to your audience's eyes? What would do it for you? It all goes together. So absolutely, there are, yes, like you said, a lot of times it's at the higher levels. There are classes that are geared towards performing, but you need to know what went into the creation of the music so that you can perform it, so that people respond to it and connect to it. If you're sitting in a music theory class, Why is it that all of these scales and intervals and triads, why are they important? What do they do? Well, they come together into something that's really beautiful and moving, or something that's interesting and new and pushes the boundaries. And why is that happening in this spot with these people? What's going on in the social context that creates that?
Yes, I agree. You're a great advocate for the model. So I guess from your perspective, what would you like to see if there were anything changed or retained? What would you like to see?
I wish that connecting had more of a place.
Yeah.
And I hope that there is a push to recognize that although jazz band and show choir and wind ensemble and string orchestra, all of these are amazing groups, and we need to keep them. We need to be open to not just admitting, but championing other types of ensemble music, because it's this type of music that our students are listening to, because we owe it to our contemporary musicians of all styles and all genres. Music deserves to be played. It deserves to be heard. It deserves to be shared. I don't necessarily like all of it, but it has value. And because we need to be open to our students experiencing below the college music performance major level ensembles that are not traditional Western style.
I know you were talking a lot about musical cultures before. Would you say from your perspective that there are any aspects of the standards that are not as open as they could be? And if they could be more open, what that might be like?
So again, I'm not uber familiar with the national
Or you
standards.
could focus on the state level if you want, if that's more familiar to you.
I will say that I think that the actual language and wordsmithing that we use is very important. And I caused kind of an uproar at the time when we were writing them, because I was trying to make this point. And the point came up when several people wanted to refer to traditional and emerging ensembles. And I said that we have to stop and we have to think about the word traditional, because that word has so much value imbued in it. Specifically, I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and supporting diversity and equity and inclusion is important to me very much because of that.
Yeah.
But the word traditional is, I'm sure people are going to jump all over me for this. The word traditional is very triggering for me.
Yeah.
Traditional implies more value given to it. A traditional marriage, for example, versus a non-traditional marriage. Which one is accepted everywhere?
Yeah.
Traditional ensembles versus emerging ensembles. Well, traditional ensembles, we have those everywhere. We love those. We support those. We fund those. We give all our money to them from our bake sales that we have to raise ourselves. And I guess I just hope very much that there will be people, if we do go forward with reworking or editing or completely redoing the standards, that will think about the language that is used and about the implied messages that are there because of that language.
Right. Absolutely. And sometimes the explicit values in that are a part of them as well. Yeah, great point. I wanted to ask you about your sort of planning process, because we were talking about sort of like macro aspects of curriculum, but how do you think through sort of, if you have a curriculum, particularly because you said it should be ever changing, how do you think through like planning with curriculum?
So a lot of times I'll have what I feel is a really brilliant idea, and that will spark something. I really want to have my students address social inequities in a way that's meaningful to them. So, okay, what can I do then that will address the standards, that's going to be meaningful for my students and that's going to be fun and engaging for them? And a lot of times I borrow ideas from colleagues. I have my wonderful department chair used to teach general music. She now does band and chorus at the elementary level, and she had a fabulous unit with her students on the blues. And so I borrowed from her. And I think that I probably dug more into the socioeconomic context of the blues than she did, and a little bit more into the historical context as well. But taking some of her ideas and then adding my own was really meaningful. And my students loved it. And we finished with having them write their own blues lyrics. And I wanted them very much to stick with the blues lyrical form. And they did, but then they also wanted to add in their own stuff to it. And so I ended up with these really cool projects where they recorded themselves rapping the lyrics in blues lyrical form over these amazing beats that they made in Soundtrap.
Oh, cool.
So did it strictly in the end follow a 12-bar blues structure? No, but I would argue that it was meaningful to them, and that, I have a large variety of students in my population. I have a decent number of students who are refugees right now. And some really meaningful things were spoken about. And I hope that it was an outlet for them. So I rely a lot on ideas from colleagues. I rely a lot on, I think this one little thing is something that I really want to bring to my students. So how can I then work my curriculum so that I can include that and still be meeting my standards and not lose, this time that we spend on oral skills as well.
Yeah. So, and is that you're able to work with that flexibility because the curriculum is a guide rather than a sequence set of things that you need to do? Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And
because I'm allowed to change that guide.
Oh, right. And then it also seems like there is a degree of openness in even the projects or plans that you're facilitating to allow space for the students to move it in a different direction.
Yes. And that's where I feel like influence from, I think probably you were asking about how the essential schools really affected my work. And now, if I look back on our conversation over the past hour, essential schools are about not teaching separate blocks of information, but about how does all of this work together. So I think maybe that really has been rather influential on me, because I do try to bring everything together.
Yeah, that's funny.
And I love creating units where I can work with classroom teachers at various levels, having students bring their poems to me, and then we set them to rhythm and we create melodies out of them, and that's their end of year project. All sorts of things like that. So I think that really has influenced me, but also I think the idea of Montessori student-led ideas, they have value. I'm not going to say to my students, what if I had said to those students who wanted to do that, nope, you can't do it. You got to play your 12-bar blues on the uke and you got to sing with it. Well, maybe they would have done the 12-bar blues. They would have mumbled in the corner of the room because they would have been embarrassed beyond belief. And when they looked back at that project, they would have been like, oh my God, that was so embarrassing and awful. Versus what I hope they can do now, which is, oh my gosh, I made this really cool piece of music and it had my personal imprint and my stamp on it. And hey, I learned about the blues from it while I was doing it.
Yeah. Well, Emily, I feel like I could geek out with you about curriculum for a really long time, but I will respect your time. I, again, really appreciate your time and really enjoyed having a conversation with you. And I'm really thankful for all this amazing work that you're doing at the state level and in your own teaching and everything. So just thanks so much. It was a real pleasure for me.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I don't often get a chance to geek out about it. And I know that I'm a kind of unusual general music teacher. So
yeah, it's great. It's great. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Here are a couple of takeaways that I'm still thinking through. First of all, one of the things that keeps coming up throughout this conversation is this idea of what is curriculum and what role does music play in relation to a music curriculum. Emily has some really interesting perspectives. I wonder if you agree or disagree. What are your thoughts on that? Another thing that keeps coming up throughout the interview is that curriculum should be empowering to music teachers. And this is a theme that you'll be hearing a lot throughout many of the conversations that I have around the notion of teacher autonomy. teacher autonomy in relationship to creating curriculum, teacher autonomy in relationship to engaging with existing curriculum, and this feeling that we should feel empowered by curriculum. And so not everyone always feels that way, and I'll be curious to hear your perspectives about whether you are feeling empowered by curriculum, if you feel empowered to create curriculum. But this is something that Emily shares throughout the interview that I thought was a really important thing to think through. Emily also talks about this idea of curriculum being a guide rather than being prescriptive, and you might differentiate that from pacing guides that are more standardized and might even, in some cases, dictate what should be taught when. Emily shares her perspectives on that and what it means to have curriculum as a guide. We also talk about this idea that we are curriculum makers as music teachers, and we should consider ourselves curriculum makers. Do you consider yourself a curriculum maker? What would that even mean? Emily speaks about the idea that we should not just sort of accept or be interested in, but we should champion diverse types of ensembles, and that we should see that happening more in our curriculum and in our programs. She also speaks about the idea that curriculum should be ever-changing. For a lot of folks, that idea is exhausting, or that might create tension. But for other people, the idea that curriculum must be ever-changing is either just a reality that they feel that they need to deal with, or in some cases, like with me, you might find it exhilarating, that you have energy. It gives you creative juices flowing when you're designing curriculum and making sure that that curriculum changes with your realities in your classrooms, in your ensembles, and with society. What are your thoughts and perspectives? Until next time, have a good one. So much to think about. What's just one step you might take in the near future? For further reflection and planning, you can access show notes and references at evantobias.net/podcast. If you want to explore more of these types of themes, dig deeper, or spark movement forward, join my music ed newsletter at evantobias.net. The newsletter provides more of my own perspectives, along with resources, current issues and topics related to music education, along with sparks and springboards for your music classes and ensembles, all to support you in designing, updating, expanding, or transforming your music program. Thanks for listening, and until next time, have a good one, and keep imagining possibilities.